stop, look at yourself, not your face, your decisions. Every time you had a chance, you hesitated. Every time you could have spoken, you stayed silent. Every time the moment arrived, you waited. You didn't wait because you were stupid. You didn't wait because you were weak. You waited because something invisible was pulling the strings inside you. Fear, not the fear of physical danger, deeper than that. Fear of judgment. Fear of standing alone. Fear of what people will think if you actually move. And here's the dark truth most people never figure out. You are not making choices. You are following limits fear already set for you. Niccolò Machiavelli watched kings fall. He watched brilliant men stay silent. He watched capable people destroy themselves, not through failure, but through hesitation. And he understood something dangerous. The most powerful people in the world are not the loudest, not the strongest, not the most intelligent. They are simply unaffected. They don't manage fear. They don't fight it. They don't build courage around it. They eliminate it completely. And when that happens, their presence becomes something others cannot challenge. In this video, you will learn exactly how fear controls you without you knowing it, why most people never escape it, and what happens to a person the moment they remove it entirely. This is not motivation. This is not positivity. This is the coldest, most calculated path to becoming untouchable. Before we begin, drop this in the comments. I move without fear. This knowledge is not for destruction. It is for protection. Understand the system, not to become the villain, but to stop being the victim. Most people think fearlessness looks like bold speeches and dramatic risks. They think courage is something you show. That's the trap, because anything that needs to be displayed is still dependent on an audience. And the moment your strength depends on how it looks, it is already fragile. Real power begins where performance ends. The people who hold genuine influence don't try to appear strong. Nothing about them stands out, obviously. But internally, something is completely different. They are not negotiating with their emotions. They are not calming themselves down. They have crossed the line most people never reach. Emotional death. Not the absence of intelligence, the removal of emotional interference. Fear doesn't rise with the same intensity anymore. Doubt has lost its authority. And because of that, their actions become precise. They don't rush. They don't freeze. They don't overthink. They execute. Machiavelli said, "Men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear." Most people live trapped between those two forces. They want approval, so they hesitate. They fear loss, so they retreat. But the moment you step outside that system, control shifts. You stop reacting. You start deciding. That is the first shift toward becoming untouchable. Drop this in the comments. I feel nothing. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Most of the time it looks like logic. It disguises itself as responsibility, as caution, as careful thinking. You believe you are being rational, but in reality, you are obeying an internal system quietly restricting every move you make. It tells you to stay quiet in a meeting, even when you have a better idea. It tells you to tolerate disrespect instead of risking conflict. It tells you to follow a path you never chose, simply because it feels safer. What makes fear powerful is not its intensity. It's its invisibility. When something controls you without being seen, you never challenge it. You begin to call it your personality, your preference, your nature. But it is none of those things. It is conditioning. Machiavelli said, "The promise given was a necessity of the past." What he understood is that human behavior is rarely guided by ideals. It is guided by pressure, and fear is the most effective pressure. Because once installed, it requires no external force. People begin to regulate themselves. They silence their own voice before anyone disagrees. They shrink their own ambition before anyone challenges it. No chains, no commands, just internal limitation. The moment you recognize this system, everything changes. Drop this in the comments. I see the system. Most advice tells you to handle anxiety, reduce stress, build confidence. It sounds practical, but it keeps the root intact. You are still negotiating with something that should not have authority in the first place. Temporary courage fades. It was never freedom, it was resistance. Real transformation begins when you stop trying to manage fear and decide to remove its influence entirely. That requires a different question. Not, how do I feel better? But why does this reaction exist at all? Most fear is not about physical danger. It is about perception, how you are seen, how you are judged, how you compare. Once you see that clearly, the structure weakens. Machiavelli said, "A man who wishes to make a profession of goodness must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good." When your actions are filtered through how they will be received, you have already lost control of your direction. Eliminating fear starts with cutting that connection. You stop measuring yourself through other people's opinions. You stop adjusting behavior to protect your image. You stop delaying action to avoid discomfort. This is not recklessness. It is detachment from perception. And here is what most people miss. Fear feeds on imagination. It projects outcomes that have not happened and convinces you they are real. The only way to break that loop is to stop giving those projections authority. You act before your mind finishes constructing excuses. You move without waiting for emotional alignment. You execute before readiness arrives. Because readiness is often a delay mechanism. Drop this in the comments. I act without doubt. The need to be liked is one of the most subtle forms of control. It doesn't feel like weakness. It feels like being cooperative, reasonable, even intelligent. But beneath that surface, it creates a constant dependency. Every decision passes through a filter. How will this be received? How will this affect my image? That filter slows you down, softens your position, forces you to adjust yourself in ways that are never in your favor. Approval turns people into negotiators of their own identity. They hold back opinions that may create tension. They reduce their ambition so it doesn't threaten others. Machiavelli said, "Men in general judge more from appearances than from reality. This is why approval is dangerous." When you rely on how others see you, you are relying on something unstable, something easily manipulated. To break this pattern, remove the importance of being liked, not loudly, not rebelliously, controlled, deliberate. You stop explaining yourself when no explanation is required. You stop justifying decisions that are already clear to you. You stop softening your tone to make others comfortable with your direction. This does not mean aggression. It means precision. Without the pressure to maintain an image, your thinking becomes direct. You make decisions faster. You are no longer splitting attention between your goal and how you appear while pursuing it. The powerful don't reject connection, but they don't depend on it. Their direction is self-defined. Their standards are internal, and when others sense that their opinion does not control your behavior, the dynamic shifts permanently. You are no longer someone who needs validation. You become someone who decides. Drop this in the comments. I seek no approval. Comfort is not neutral. It conditions you. The more you stay within familiar environments and safe choices, the narrower your operating range becomes. Your tolerance for pressure decreases. Small challenges begin to feel larger than they actually are. This is how fear maintains its position. It doesn't dominate you aggressively. It simply keeps you comfortable long enough until anything outside that zone feels threatening. Machiavelli said, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." What separates them is not intelligence. It is tolerance for discomfort. Training through controlled discomfort means deliberately stepping into situations that challenge your current limits, not randomly, not recklessly, with intention. You speak when staying silent would feel safer. You act when delay would feel more comfortable. You position yourself where your identity is not protected by familiarity. At first, your system will resist. It would generate reasons, excuses, justifications. But each time you move forward anyway, something shifts. The intensity of that resistance decreases. What once felt difficult starts to feel manageable. What once triggered hesitation starts to feel neutral. You do not eliminate fear by thinking differently. You eliminate it by experiencing situations that prove your limits were exaggerated. Over time, your confidence is no longer based on belief. It is based on evidence. You have seen yourself operate under pressure. That experience replaces doubt with certainty, grounded in reality. Attachment is the hidden anchor behind most hesitation. When your identity becomes tied to a specific result, every decision carries weight it should not have. Success feels like validation. Failure feels like loss. And because of that connection, your actions become cautious. You start protecting the outcome instead of executing the process. Machiavelli said, "Fortune is a woman, and if you wish to keep her under, it is necessary to beat and ill-use her." What he understood: outcomes are uncertain. Trying to control them directly creates frustration. Acting decisively without attachment creates advantage. Detachment means separating your identity from what happens after you act. Your role is to decide, to execute, to adapt, not to define your worth by how events unfold. When this separation becomes stable, the weight disappears. You are no longer hesitating because there is nothing at stake in terms of identity. You are not trying to prove anything. You are simply moving. Most individuals operate with visible attachment. They reveal what they want, what they fear losing, what they are trying to protect. That makes them predictable, easy to influence. When someone knows what you need, they can use it against you. But when you are detached, that leverage disappears. You become difficult to control because there is nothing obvious to take from you. Drop this in the comments. I release outcomes. When hesitation disappears, something else takes its place. Not aggression, not chaos. Clarity, a sharp, controlled ability to act without internal conflict. This is where fearlessness evolves into something more refined, something most people misunderstand: ruthlessness. In its true form, it has nothing to do with cruelty. It is the discipline of making decisions without emotional interference when those decisions require precision. Most people hesitate at critical moments because they are trying to protect something: an image, a relationship, a sense of comfort. That hesitation creates delay, and delay creates weakness. Machiavelli said, "Injuries ought to be done all at one time, so that being tasted less, they offend less." When action is necessary, it must be executed decisively. Prolonged hesitation creates more damage than the action itself. Ruthlessness means removing unnecessary delay, avoiding partial moves, finishing what needs to be done without internal negotiation, not cruelty. Accuracy. Most individuals operate with hesitation patterns. They wait, they test, they seek reassurance. That creates a predictable rhythm. When someone is predictable, they are easy to anticipate, easy to counter. Ruthlessness breaks that rhythm. Your actions are not delayed by comfort. Your decisions are not adjusted by external reaction. Your execution is not interrupted by doubt. People cannot predict when you will move. They cannot assume you will hesitate. That unpredictability becomes pressure. Drop this in the comments. I act with precision. At this stage, the shift is complete. You are no longer focused on removing internal limits. That work is done. What emerges now is external impact, not through force, not through volume, through presence. When someone operates without hesitation, without visible pressure, and without the need for validation, others begin to respond differently. They become careful. They become observant. They regulate themselves without being told. Machiavelli said, "It is much safer to be feared than loved if one must choose." This is not about intimidation. It is about stability. Fear creates consistency in how others behave around you because it introduces consequence into their decisions. When your behavior is unpredictable, your reactions minimal, your intentions unreadable, people cannot rely on familiar patterns to understand you. And when people cannot predict you, they adjust. They speak more carefully. They act more deliberately. They avoid unnecessary risk around you, Not because you said anything extreme, because you are not doing what they expect. Most people reveal themselves quickly. Emotions visible. Intentions clear. Limits easy to identify. When you remove that transparency, the dynamic changes. You do not over-explain. You do not react immediately. You do not reveal your internal state. Silence becomes your strongest tool, not silence as avoidance, silence as control. You allow space to exist without filling it. You let others speak, adjust, and reveal more than they intended. The absence of your response creates pressure because people naturally try to resolve uncertainty. At this point, you are no longer part of the emotional environment around you. You are shaping it, not through force, through the absence of weakness. Drop this in the comments. I am untouchable. At the beginning, you were like everyone else, hesitating under pressure, measuring actions based on how they might be received, not because you lacked ability, because something invisible was shaping your limits. Fear. Now you see it differently. You understand how it controls behavior, how it creates hesitation, how it keeps people predictable, cautious, and easy to influence. And more importantly, you have seen what happens when it disappears. You become detached, precise, difficult to read, and even harder to control. Machiavelli built his entire philosophy on one simple reality. People are not guided by ideals, they are guided by forces, and the one who understands those forces commands the outcome. There are always two paths. The average man lives inside fear. He protects his image, avoids discomfort, and waits for the right moment that never comes. His life is shaped by reaction. The powerful man steps outside that system. He acts without hesitation, moves without seeking approval, and remains stable regardless of what he gains or loses. His life is shaped by decision. That is the separation. Not talent, not luck, not intelligence. Control. And once you reach that level, something changes permanently. You no longer chase validation. You no longer react to pressure. You no longer depend on outcomes. You operate on your own terms. If this video shifted your perspective, don't just watch and move on. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who is still operating inside the system. Subscribe to this channel, because this is where you stop thinking like everyone else and start moving like a strategist. And drop this final affirmation in the comments. When fear dies inside me, power takes its place. I am untouchable.